Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. People have been asking me to get on the co-founder of peakprosperity.com. He has a master's in business from Cornell. He has a PhD in toxicology from Duke University. You would never think that somebody could, match, a business with infectious disease, and yet Chris Martenson can do that. And I have Chris Martenson on from peakprosperity.com. A lot of people have been looking to have you on. Chris, thank you for joining us today at this pivotal time on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg. Real pleasure to be here with you and all your listeners today.
Now, I know you have a seminar coming up. We'll talk about that. It's May 1st through 3rd. We'll talk about that at the end of the deal. It's probably going to be one of your most important seminars among a lot of important seminars that you and Adam Taggart have had, your co-founder. Nice guy, Adam Taggart. But anyway, let's start with Wuhan, the China virus. Is it getting better like they want you to think, or are the headlines I'm reading on places like Zero Hedge real, where it's getting worse and people are getting a little hinky about how bad this is going to get?
It's getting worse. And this is always a tale of two stories, inside China and outside China. So inside China, we've been very suspicious of the numbers all along. I think they've been underreporting the number of cases by at least a factor of 10, maybe more. Also with deaths. This is both for infections and deaths. So we don't know what to make of that, but we can trust that the Chinese government would not lock down 90% of their economy just to save a couple of lives. They don't roll that way. So there's something there that's very worrisome to them. Ex-China, different story there. We trust the numbers a lot more. We can trust what's happened on the Diamond Princess cruise ship, what's happening in South Korea. Singapore's got great tracking, all of that. So when we're looking outside of China, Greg, we are seeing the cases of this coronavirus are now increasing exponentially. And it's got a very high doubling time, very short doubling time, very, very high rate of infectivity. So it's not the flu. It's not SARS. A lot of the media has been trying to tell people it's nothing to worry about. We don't take that view at all. Once you understand the actual virology aspects of this particular COVID-19, it's called now, it's a real beast.
You have been attacked for basically reporting what you know about. I mean, you have a PhD in toxicology at Duke University. It's not like, it's some mail order degree from some, from small island in the Caribbean. And then you have all this experience with the economy and you have a master's in business. They're taking you down in Wikipedia. Your YouTube page is under attack. Please tell me about that?
Well, sure. This is standard fare. I think there's a little bit of sour grapes on the part of the establishment media, possibly. But what happened was I put out an alert to my subscribers on January 24th. I made it public because I thought this was really important public information. That was way before the WHO came out. Remember, the WHO was still as recently as February 2nd saying, hey, we shouldn't, put any trade or travel restrictions on China. Clearly not the right course of action. I was calling for those right out of the gate. So that ran against the official account of what the WHO wanted to say. It led to my wiki page, which has been up for 12 years, being taken down by some random wiki editor who declared me a non-relevant person and that my degree was too long ago for me to be opining about such things and that I engaged in conspiracy theory. Now, let me be clear. My YouTube channel, all I'm doing is taking the daily news as reported by major outlets, interpreting them and trying to make sense of them so people can be prepared. Apparently, that's a grievous sin. And of course, Google demonetized all of those videos. They've gotten well over 10 million views at this point collectively. So yes, the system, Twitter, shadow banning, Google, all of those, they're very interested in controlling the narrative. They're not social media. If social to you means something like we care about each other, my definition of being social. Social media is all about presenting a point of view, and they're really allied with what we would call the macro or the state point of view. I'm out here just trying to communicate with people, Greg, let them know how important this is, that they need to prepare, because it's not just a health risk that's there. We have to understand the economic risk of this is extraordinary because we're seeing the complete breakdown of macro global supply chains, and nobody can predict what's going to happen with that. I think we could easily guess that it's not going to be favorable to the overall economy.
The stuff coming out, I mean, every day I've been reporting on this every week on my wrap up, and then I've been having people on and talk about how dangerous this is. But, the U.S. is talking about how China needs to honor their commitments. They're talking about how the U.S. exposed to immediate impact from supply chain shock. This is all coming out. This is from Deutsche Bank. This isn't from, some guy in his closet. Rabobank said 90%. That's the number you used of the exports have been shut down. 90%. That may be gracious. You have 30-year yields hit record lows. You have 10-year yields inverted to 1 month money. I mean, you have 1 month you get 1.6%, and for 10-year money to lock it up for 10 years, you get 1.52% right now. So somebody thinks something is very wrong. How bad economically do you think this is going to get?
Really bad, and here's why. I've been on your show before, and I've been just a fierce critic of the central banks and what they did. Listen, maybe we had a crisis in 2008 that required some fixing. Okay, excuse me, I'll give you some of that. But 11 years later, they're still pouring money in and doing overnight emergency repos and doing everything they can to just keep everything parked and elevated, but they never address the underlying structural issues, which we've talked about, right? 1 in 8 companies is a zombie company, meaning their operating income cash flows are insufficient to even make their interest payments. So they have to keep rolling their debts. So we got ourselves into the situation where sovereign nations are addicted to needing to have more and more debt. The United States running $1 trillion+ deficits. We need huge access to debt markets, right? All the companies out there that have been leveraging their balance sheets because they thought it made a lot of sense, and it probably did, long ago black swans came along, to go ahead and borrow money, pile it up on the balance sheet, leverage your balance sheet, use that cash to come back and buy and retire equity. It's a classic debt for equity swap, but these are like little leverage buyouts inside of each corporate balance sheet, right? That works as long as nothing goes wrong. Well, this virus just went very, very wrong. It's not the destination that kills you. It's how fast you stop when you get there, right? So this shutting down of China is not just taking the world's number 2 economy in nominal terms and throwing it basically into neutral. This is taking the world's most important manufacturing center and shutting it down all at once. That's like throwing a car into reverse at 60 on the highway, right? Nobody can really predict what's going to happen next, but I can tell you that the supply chain disruptions are going to be legendary. All you need is one factory that's unable to produce a critical tier 1 component somewhere in a very long manufacturing chain, and the next thing you know, none of those manufacturing centers are going to be doing anything. Listen, we can't predict this yet. Everybody's scrambling to get their arms around it, but it's been absolutely ridiculous to watch the stock market go to new highs and rally every day. It's actually up from the time the coronavirus was announced, and I've been out there sounding the alarm saying, no, this is a very, very bad pandemic. Let's leave the money aside for a second, just from a human interest standpoint. This thing has a transmissivity of value that is so high. The only chance of getting it down to a place where you can contain the contagion so it doesn't spread is if you do what China is doing in Wuhan and other major centers. You have to go to complete lockdown. You have to have nobody leave their houses. And unfortunately, with the long incubation period on this thing, it looks like you're going to have to do that for a period of months. I understand how China can do this, but Greg, what we're wrestling with, and nobody has answers, but we're wrestling with this online and at my website is what does that mean when it comes to America, where 40% of families have zero money in the bank, where a set of stitches at the ER could set you back 50 grand? How is this even going to work if or when it comes to America, given how our sick care system operates, given the razor thin, budget issues for most Americans? I don't have any answers for that, but I'm telling people you've got to be ready for this.
What are you telling people to do to get ready? That's what everybody's probably sitting here thinking, what can I do? So what can somebody do watching this going, oh my God, this is going to be awful, at least economically, even if it doesn't get here? That all these companies doing business over there, every car company, Hyundai. I mean, they wrote this on Reuters a couple of weeks ago, and they were clever. Everything from Hyundai to Toyota is shut down. Whoa. You mean Ford, General Motors, BMW, Fiat, Nissan, Honda, everybody shut down? General Motors, Chevrolet, everybody in China is shut down? Yeah. That's just the car companies. Apple is warning about supply chain disruptions. So that means if Apple's doing it, everybody, the whole complex is in big trouble. Aren't American companies going to be in trouble? And how can you get ready for this on a financial basis and a medical basis? How can you get ready?
All right, 3 questions in there. First, yes, Apple, just take an example. Every so often we get these cheery little headlines. Oh, the Foxconn plants might open up again. But those Foxconn plants aren't individual manufacturing centers where they have all the components. Let's call it 1,000. They have 1,000 different components that go into an iPhone. They are the manufacturing center, and they have some of those components get manufactured there, but most of those are outsourced to other plants. How many of those plants, Greg, need to be shut down in order for this plant to no longer run? Well, it's any of them that make a critical component that you can't second source. So there's a chipset, or somebody makes the camera array, or whatever those pieces are. If you run out of camera arrays, you don't make the phone, right? So it's a very gigantic logistical problem that's also compounded by the fact that container ships bringing raw materials and intermediates are also not coming and going as before. So yes, has Apple warned? Sure, but have they warned enough? Not nearly, as far as I'm concerned, in this particular story. Second, financially, people need to understand that this I've already gotten tons of emails, I don't know, a couple dozen, Greg, from people saying, my company is out of stock. We're already running, razor thin sort of quarter to quarter cash flows. We don't know what's going to happen in our company if we are out of cash for a quarter, but we're already looking at well beyond a 1 quarter disruption. This is a 2 quarter disruption. Those zombie companies we mentioned before, many of them aren't going to make it. So people need to start getting ready financially. Pare your expenses down, anything unnecessary. Drop it now, drop it early. That's what we learned from 2008, right? This could be like that. I'm not saying it's going to be, but it really could be like that. So act as if it is, right? Until we get different information. But then mostly what I care about is helping people stay physically and healthily safe in this story, right? So your health is of paramount concern. And here, again, I've been going through all of this on my YouTube channel, going through the science. This is a real devil of a virus. It looks like there's a chance that your first infection, 80%, most people just get something like the flu, maybe a bad flu, maybe the sniffles, maybe nothing at all. 20%, especially the elderly, that's 70 and older in this particular story, they have a real rough ride of it, and that's where most of the serious complications and deaths are arrayed in this particular story. But the concern here, Greg, is that your second exposure could kick off what's called the cytokine storm. It's where your own body's immune system is really battling yourself in this story because of just how this virus is run. We don't know yet. This is really early, giant grain of salt, but we're starting to get data that says that maybe the second infection is the one you want to avoid even more than the first, especially if you're younger. And so if that's the case, people need to be ready for a very long, protracted period of social distancing and isolation. So for people like me who can work from home, fantastic. I'm going to do that as much as possible. We've also bought and advised people to get standard materials. You should get masks, gloves. You want to be prepared to self-treat at home for any illness unless you have to go to the hospital. Again, lots of guidelines out there for where to draw that line. I'm not giving medical advice here, but standard fare if you're going to treat at home. If you have this thing, there's a lot of advice on our website about how you would go about doing that, developed by doctors, developed by nurses, developed by real professionals. So yes, I've got a PhD in a medical field, but I'm not a practicing MD. So we've got great advice for people how you would go about staying safe if it comes to that. Right now, we don't have a lot of signs that it's spreading aggressively outside of Asia at this point in time, although we have our first indications that looks like Iran got hit really hard. It looks like now we've just got the headlines that maybe this has also made its way into the Middle East in terms of Lebanon and Israel. So if it's spreading across those places, then it just looks like it's a matter of time before it gets here too, if it's not already here and spreading.
What kind of masks do you get? Is there a certain type of mask you should get? A certain type, just regular, rubber gloves, that you can buy at Walmart or at Costco or anything like that? And then what kind of a mask would you get?
Well, the standard is an N95 mask, meaning it's filtering things down to 0.3 microns. That's plenty to stop a droplet if there's a droplet in the air. But this virus, we have data now, and the Chinese treatment protocol is also warning doctors that this thing spreads by what's called aerosols. What's the difference? A droplet is a little tiny thing. You might even be able to see it if you had a sunlight, slanting through. You could see it, and it would fall out of the air usually within 1 to 2 meters, so within 6 feet. Aerosol's different. That's like the stuff you see floating in that sunbeam that doesn't fall and it just keeps walking around. That aerosolization, that's how measles spreads. It can spread all the way across a room. There's, the Diamond Princess cruise ship We heard stories that they at the end were just taping up vents and trying to prevent the spread of this thing. There's a case in Hong Kong where it spread through a building, seemingly through pipes. All of that, Greg says, it spreads through aerosol. So to stop an aerosol transmission, you all both have the mask and you have to cover your eyes. I mean, swim goggles, actual, mask things, actual goggles that you might wear as a painter or something. But you would have to really, if you're going to be in close contact with people who've got this, both the eyes and the mouth and nose have to be covered. And of course, you have to do that all correctly. And there's a way to put this on so you're not accidentally breathing around the sides and all of that. Plenty of videos out there on how to set that stuff up correctly. But this is why I started at the beginning, Greg. I said this is a very dangerous pandemic kind of a virus. We've never seen anything like it before since the Spanish flu. And so this thing almost certainly at this point is going to romp around the world. It's the first time is going to be bad. We're worried about the second time, but we don't have data around that yet. But for people who are listening, you have to be prepared for the idea of what would happen if it looks like what's happened in Qom, Iran, and what's happened all across China, and what looks like it's about to happen in Daegu, South Korea, where they've had a big outbreak of clusters, is where they may well say we're going into an imposed quarantine in a city. And so how do you prepare for that? Just ask yourself all the questions. What would I need if I was going to be, stuck inside my home for 30 or 60 days, which is probably a reasonable amount of time to plan for.
Wow. Water, food. I tell people all the time, I say, go buy yourself 10 cases of water. I mean, at Costco, you can buy for $3.50, $4. It's $40. I mean, $40 is a pretty cheap insurance policy. Water, got to have that. Canned food, you don't have to get all exotic. Buy canned food, it'll last for a year, year and a half. I mean, right? I mean, don't get cute. Just get yourself, what's on the shelves right now. Right now, I don't think people are worried about it, right? But they should be.
No, and go buy stuff that you would eat anyway. I'm not saying go out and buy a bunch of lentils which you've never cooked or enjoyed ever in your life. Go out and buy other things that you would normally eat anyway that have a long shelf life. We call it the deep pantry. Nothing wrong with that. And if all of this blows over and nothing came of it, guess what? You'll eat it anyway. It's just pre-buying it if you can. So for people who can't afford that, think about cheaper stuff. There are lots of ways, again, if you're going to go rice and green beans for people who really can't afford it. But otherwise, just get out there and buy the stuff that you normally would. It's just that deep pantry concept makes all the sense in the world. I don't know why our health officials aren't advising people to do that. I kind of do. I mean, they don't want to incite panic to them. That's the worst thing that could happen. I think there's a lot of territory between panic and doing nothing, right? And that's where you and I talk to our audiences who are thoughtful, prudent people who are like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why wouldn't I just go out and get for my family some extra food and have that, or water, and have that at home? Of course, it's very simple, logical things that people can do. And I will tell you that once you do that, you'll feel better. You'll feel like you're providing and protecting and caring for your family. It feels good to be somewhat prepared. So I'm mystified why Google and Twitter feel like this sort of message has to be sort of stifled or shadow banned or shut down, because it's just being what I think Americans have always been, which is resourceful and self-reliant. And how that's certainly become something that's inappropriate in this story, and that we should leave everything up to the authorities is a mystery to me. But I'm kind of a person who believes in that self-reliance.
I've had you on, and I fully realized that this was going to be demonetized, but I don't care. I mean, this is, yeah, would I like to have everything monetized? Sure, yeah, okay. But this is a big deal. I wanted to get into the precious metals, because you know about that too. And we haven't talked about your seminar yet, which may be done by video, but we'll get to that in just a second. Gold up another 20-something bucks on Friday. Somebody's worried. And I called my gold dealer. Her name is Melody at Discount Gold and Silver Trading. She's my only sponsor. And she says, man, I don't have a great, I'm getting a few calls, but that's big money buying gold. And that's what she thinks. And she has been selling gold for 2 decades to the public. And so what do you think about the gold hopping up and all this, these big vaults in the price of gold, and even silver is catching a big? What do you think about that?
Well, I've been a fan of gold and silver and other precious metals for quite a while, largely because I'm a critic of central bank policy. I've never advised people get gold because it's a great inflation hedge. Maybe that's a story, but it's not the reason I think you own gold and silver. 2 separate words, but gold to me is something you own because it provides insurance against some sort of a financial accident, right? That's where it's going to shine. So imagine this: China's shadow banking system is probably as large or much larger than the US shadow banking system. So shadow banking is, private equity and hedge funds who are borrowing money from, banks who really don't have any reserve requirements, and they're getting it from, tapping the discount window or borrowing from the Fed. There's this whole giant, huge amounts of money out there, and they're all leveraged and everybody's borrowed, and it's all protected with derivatives, right? So, if I get my bets wrong as a hedge fund, that's okay because I've protected myself with a bunch of interest rate swaps or something like that, or credit default obligations. What's something?
I'm laughing, but I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because we know those aren't going to perform. They're going to go. It's going to be just like AIG, right? And Goldman Sachs. Oops. Oh, we don't have the money. Go ahead.
It's insurance that works perfectly until you need it, and then it's actually worthless, right? Is kind of how I think there's a possibility. So why is gold popping? Well, listen, it's the only tier one banking asset that's not somebody else's liability. It's the only thing I can call money that isn't somebody else's liability. Even a Federal Reserve note, a crisp, $100 Benjamin, says Federal Reserve note right up top. That's the liability of the U.S. Federal Reserve. So gold plays a very strong role when trust gets low. And so in this system, if I can't even analyze, and I don't think anybody can, really what the logistical nightmare is for one company and their manufacturing, let's call it Apple, how are we supposed to make sense of whatever the number is? A quadrillion dollars of cross-linked derivatives that all sort of thread through each other and inform each other. How are those going to behave in a real emergency? Nobody knows, but there's some accidents waiting in there. And so that's sort of the Lehman moment, right? Lehman went down in 2008 because people couldn't trust that their counterparties were good for all the things that Lehman had promised. That's what happened to AIG. They made bets that they couldn't cover with their magic checkbook. And so that whole thing needed to be bailed out. But this, Greg, what we're talking about here, if the global supply chain gets arrested for 2 or more months, we're not talking about one company like AIG having trouble where, Hank Paulson has to ride to the rescue with $700 billion of fresh U.S. taxpayer money. We're talking about a system where tens of thousands of interlocked components are all suddenly frozen and nobody quite knows how to unravel all of that, right? I think that's well beyond the capability of the Federal Reserve to throw some more QE money into the markets and, goose stocks for a little while longer. This is the real deal. This isn't a dress rehearsal. It's happening. People need to make sense of it as best they can. You know what? If you, in the absence of being able to make sense of all of it, having some gold makes a lot of sense. I think that's why we're seeing it pop here. And by the way, it's popping with the bullion banks throwing unbelievable amounts of fresh paper at it to try and keep it from popping. And I think they're going to get in trouble on this one if this goes much further.
The silver is still looking like a deal. It's 18 and change. It's David Morgan. I just had him on recently. He says mining costs is, plus or minus $15. I mean, not a lot of risk there just for having it. I know there's an industrial component and they could stop using silver for a while, but there's also a money component, pound sterling, our own money pre-64 and earlier. Silver is, I mean, I'm not saying bet the farm, but shouldn't people also be holding some silver as a core asset?
Well, I hold quite a bit as a core asset, so maybe I'm just talking my book here, Greg, but I really believe in silver. I think at $18 is just a screaming buy because it's going to cost more than that to get it out of the ground any old day now, and it's got extraordinary industrial uses, and maybe it'll get remonetized at some point. I'm not holding out for that. Gold is money to me. I said they're two separate words. Silver is this incredibly rare, depleting, amazing thing that, by the way, one of the treatments that I've heard about that they're trying in China, they got 100 different clinical trials going on right now. But I've heard about this U.S. company sells basically a nebulizer that puts mist into the air, that puts ionic silver out into the air. And China's bought like 100 of these things at $10,000 a pop because that's how they're fogging the operating rooms and the hospital ways with this silver material in order to knock down any pathogens, especially this coronavirus in the air. So silver's got, I think, a lot of roles to continue to play in our lives going forward. Medical roles have always been a big one, but I think those are increasing. So I really like silver a lot, but it's not the same play for me as gold. So that's why it's not gold and silver, two separate words. And I do own both for the reasons we just described.
I want to talk about debt. You talked about the quadrillion in derivatives. I think Egon von Greyer's about a year ago, who is Matterhorn Capital Management, said, really, if the risk is unknowable, it's 2 quadrillion. If you add everything up, all together, it's two in the world, 2 quadrillion of leverage in debt. Take your pick. Could we have? And I had Martin Armstrong on. He said that they were. I was stunned when he said. So they're trying to stop a daisy chain of default around the world with the repo market. And he goes, yes. Could we have a daisy chain? He did. I couldn't believe it. It was pretty direct. Yes. Mm-hmm. To stop a daisy chain of default. Could we get a daisy chain of default of this massive debt around the world that's uncontrollable and unstoppable?
Yes, I'll say that too. Yes, that's the fear. That's why the central banks have been doing everything in their power to just keep pumping, and they do it at every slight down wiggle. It's been absolutely maddening to watch because, listen, if you have to rescue something for 6 months, maybe a year, but when you're 12 years into this, 10, 11, 12 years into this, and you're still doing it, and your interventions are getting larger and larger and larger, right? The warning signal for people should have been last September 2019 when the Fed reversed course and just started shoving money into the markets, hundreds of billions, right? And they started QE, but it's not QE, but it's 60 billion a month of treasuries. I mean, it's just, those are insane amounts of money. And so that was already, I think, the markets were fragile. Something in the background plumbing broke. We don't know exactly what it was. We had all sorts of people on our site, and I know you did too, trying to decode that and say, what was it that broke? Something in the repo market broke. Was it this? Was it that? A lot of guesswork, but something broke. That was obvious from the numbers being thrown out. And now you take that, and I don't think that was fixed in any way, shape, or form. I think it was only delayed and possibly made larger because of the moral hazard of continuing to prop up things that shouldn't be propped up and the message that sends. And now all of a sudden you have something the Fed can't do anything about. I don't care how many dollars you print. If one of Foxconn's 1,000 supply chain suppliers is not coming back to work and making a critical component, there are no cell phones to make. There are no cell phones to buy. There's nothing to be done about that. You can print all the money you want, but what happens? So this is where I think reality and money printing collide with each other. In the last couple of weeks, I think the stock market's been placing a lot of money on the idea that money printing can cure all ills, and 10 years of conditioned habit will do that, will create that sort of impression. I think it's got it all wrong. This is, right now, everything I was saying a couple of weeks ago is coming true now. And my bet is that within another couple of weeks, the larger markets will catch up to the idea that, oh my gosh, the supply chain disruption was actually the disruption of both a complicated and a complex system. So I'm using complexity here as a concept, a complex system where once one of those gets perturbed, it defies any ability to predict it. It defies any ability to manage it. You just have to start over again and rebuild it from ground up if it comes to that. So, and this is all including the idea, Greg, that somehow China gets its arms around this larger disease process. It gets the R naught, in this case, below 1, meaning it's not transmitting to more than one person to another person. It's below 1, so that they can get back to work at some reasonable point in time. If they can't, the chance of a social revolution in China, because people finally are tired of starving in their homes or whatever's going on behind those closed doors, and they erupt and say, we can't do this. Or the Chinese government orders everybody back to work and the virus re-erupts. I mean, there's really no good options there. But the risk that China's manufacturing is going to take a sustained hit is very, very high. And that has not even remotely been reflected in the stock market yet.
Then you have the 40 trillion. Michael Pento's come on here and said, well, China has 40 trillion in debt. How do you service 40 trillion in debt when you can't make anything for a profit?
You print. You just print more. See also the price of gold. So I think the price of gold is detecting that we're just going to see the only possible response to this is to print, right? So let's back up. Let's imagine, if I go to the hospital for ER and I get 5 stitches and it's $6,000. What happens? The average length of stay for somebody who does get this viral pneumonia and goes into the ICU, assuming even there's enough ICU beds, the average stay is 2 weeks. Do you know what 2 weeks in an ICU costs? I don't know, $500,000 or something. If people can't pay that, or the insurers are suddenly bankrupted through all that process, do the hospitals go out of business? No. I think the Fed has to just print and hand money. But then where does that stop? So, oh my gosh, we have auto parts distributors that are also now about to lay off lots of people because they don't have auto parts. Well, okay, let's make payroll for them. I think you're going to see that printing is that magic hammer and everything looks like a nail, and we're going to see the Fed print like crazy, and China's going to print like crazy. And I think that's where we're at in the story, and that's why I think gold is popping, is it's detecting systemic problems and a lot of printing coming.
I want to talk about your conference, May 1st through 3rd. You were telling me in the pre-interview that, well, so we're going to have it May 1st through 3rd, but we may have to be prepared to do it online too. So tell me about your conference, which I suspect is going to be a sellout and very important. Tell me about your conference, the 1st and 3rd, through the 3rd of May, please.
Yeah, so let me just pull this up right here. And yeah, it's to get to it directly at our website, you go to peakprosperity.com/seminar2020. And this seminar it's sold out every year so far. This year we have this complexity. We don't know if the coronavirus makes it to this country. We're not sure now if how that's going to play out, but we are working very hard to figure out how we would deliver it anyway. So listen, we're all going to hope that this coronavirus just blows away, something happens, everything goes back to normal. Hey, then we're going to have it May 1st through 3rd in Sebastopol. It's wonderful. Beautiful.
California.
Yep.
Okay.
And wonderful weather there, great people, everybody gets to meet each other. But if for some reason this coronavirus prevents that, we will make other arrangements and we'll get it done. But so if people want to find out more about that, go to peakprosperity.com/seminar2020 and we'll keep you informed. And one way or the other, we're going to have this thing and it's going to be wonderful.
For the actual seminar, I suspect the World Health Organization thought that Corona wouldn't be here in mass if it comes at the end of 2020, beginning of 2020, but who knows? But you're only talking about May. How much does it cost if you want to go to the actual conference? Let's be hopeful and say you'll have your conference. How much does it cost to go?
Well, all that information's on the website right now, and people can find out and sign up. There's a variety of different ways that people can engage with that. So I'll just send people there, and they can take a look at that. And we really hope to get everybody there. It'd be great.
You're a great patriot, a great American. You've taken hits. You were telling me just in the last few weeks that your YouTube channel got 10 million views.
Yeah, not a penny either.
Not a penny.
And I'm sorry for the hit you're going to take on this channel because we said the dreaded word coronavirus. And
it's okay.
And we're not WHO officials, so that's a no-no.
Yeah, I understand that, but I mean, you've done way more. I mean, you're a patriot. You're a good man. You want to see people do well. You want to warn them. That's very, very noble of you. And then you're doing it and taking a big giant hit. So I hope you do well in your conference. I will put all the links up. I will put up the links to Peak Prosperity. There's lots of free information there. You also could be a member of Peak Prosperity. That's a different deal, right? A subscription service.
Yep, and behind the paywall, I'm putting all my best information about the health impacts of this out in public sphere because that feels right. So, that's not an economic decision. That's just a correct decision. So we're doing that. But behind the paywall is where we get to discuss things that I can't talk about publicly because if I did, I would get further shadow banned and other things because this is fast-moving situation, Greg. There's a lot of data that don't have complete information yet. Sometimes you have to take a winger on incomplete information and say, here's what I think. But if I did that in public, you know how I'd get killed by the press, by other people for saying something that turned out to be wrong. They won't remember the 8 times I was right. They'll remember the 2 times I was wrong. But behind the paywall, that's what we're doing is we're juggling really incomplete information that's just coming in so fast right now. So that's what's back there.
Well, my opinion, a guy with a general studies degree at University of Missouri, and my analysis on the coronavirus is a lot different than a guy who has a PhD from Duke University in toxicology. So that's what you would be paying for, saying, okay, listen, I've been, lots of heavy training, lots of book work, and your analysis would be pretty critical, even if you were only right, half the time, which you probably write way more than that. But, you would be at insights that they wouldn't tell you on Fox or CNBC or CNN or any of the other Wall Street Journal. They don't want to cause a panic. I mean, but it's even worse when it comes to fruition, right? And then there is a full-blown panic because they all lied.
I know, and that's the fourth turning aspect of all this, right? And so people need to be aware of that. But if people want to find out what's going on medically, and what the actual data is. Listen, the press will catch up with me eventually. But go to YouTube and check out chrismartenson.com, and that's my YouTube channel. And we've got I'm putting out a daily video, usually premiering at 6 o'clock at night, just covering all of the day's news, the interpretation of it, what it really means, what the implications are, how you might want to prepare given that. That's all out there. And that's the one that we talked about is getting lots and lots of views. And that's without any help from the good folks at Google.
I'm laughing, but it's not funny, actually. I mean, what you're doing is actually putting out. I mean, listen, the news is awful. And the stuff, I always have this big fat battle of people putting their opinion on as fact. But if you look at the facts, it's awful. And then you have somebody with a PhD in toxicology that says, okay, here's what this means. Is pretty valuable, I would think. But at any rate, listen, Chris Martenson, I know you got to go. Thank you for coming on and giving us a meld of the actual virus, the medical, the pandemic aspect of it, and melding it with the economy. You guys at Peak Prosperity are fantastic. You have a subscription service. You have your event coming up May 1st through 3rd. I'll put links up for all that stuff, your subscription, and of course, there's lots of information on the homepage of peakprosperity.com. Chris Martenson, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg. My pleasure.